Hello there, it's Lynda Hill here reporting from Down Under. I thought I'd have a look at the inauguration chart for January 20, 2017 for Donald Trump to see what's going on in that chart and to see what we might see from it. As a disclaimer here, I'll add that yes, I'm from Australia and I didn't vote and I don't have any action in the American political scene, except that I do watch a lot of what's going on over there, and I have been to the States 29 times. So I have a lot of friends in the United States, and a lot of my clients are American as well, and I have a great interest in what goes on, and so does the rest of the world, for that matter. And we are very interested, and we have been watching it to see what's happening, and it's a very, very interesting chart. So between now and January 20, Donald Trump's chart is going to have quite a number of Saturn transits. It's already having quite a number of Uranus and Jupiter transits, and the Saturn transits are about to kick in. So between now and then, all sorts of unknowns are, very likely to happen. And my take on it is that I have been saying all along, well, I did say that I thought that Donald Trump was going to win the election. I didn't waver on that right until the last minute when I wondered if it was going to be Hillary, and that was just the night before. But all along I had the feeling that Donald Trump was going to win it. And I do think, the vast majority of the planet were very surprised that he actually did. So there's a lot of Saturn that's going to be unfolding, as I've already said. Saturn's going to be going over some of the key things in his chart. Saturn's going to be going over his Saturn is right now on his south node, on Donald Trump's south node, and it's going to be transiting over his moon and opposing his sun, and of course it's opposing his north node. It's already been opposing his Uranus. So there's a lot of Saturn that's going on. It's going to be showing quite a few things to us very soon. One of the major things I think about Donald Trump's chart that really I found very interesting is the degree of his moon. And for those who might not know, I use something called the Sabian Symbols for my analysis. I was going to say diagnosis, but that's there too. And the Sabian Symbols, you always add 1 to the degree to get the accurate Sabian symbol. So looking at Donald Trump's chart, his moon is on 21 degrees and 12 minutes of Sagittarius. So that is Sagittarius 22. No matter what the minutes are in a degree, you always just add 1. So, his moon is on Sagittarius 22. And I hope that explains it. And you can always go to my website, sabiansymbols.com, and there's a lot more information about the Sabian symbols on there. They are a phrase that goes with each degree of the zodiac. And in that phrase, it's quite extraordinary how these things came about in 1925. They tell a story, and the stories are very... they're very edifying. They're very revealing. And the Sabian symbol for Donald Trump's moon is the Chinese laundry degree. And the Chinese laundry, Donald Trump talks about China quite a lot. I don't think it's confined to China or issues to do with China, but the Chinese laundry is, we can really see how that is manifested itself in Donald Trump's life, in terms of the fact that there's a lot of documented evidence to say that he hasn't paid his workers, or he doesn't pay them very well, issues to do with the minimum wage. But he mentions China really a lot. And so when Saturn, very soon, in the next few weeks, Saturn's going to go over the Chinese laundry degree, and that's going to affect the whole world, because Saturn will be on that degree for the entire world. But it will mostly affect Donald Trump, of course, because his moon is there. It's fascinating that his moon is on the Chinese laundry. There can be a certain sense of shutting oneself away too. It's almost like he shuts himself away in Trump Tower. The Chinese laundry often has the shutters up, and there's a lot of secrecy about what goes on inside. There can be money laundering. There can be secret deals. There can be things looking very different from the outside than they look from the inside. A lot of hidden things that aren't disclosed. Again, I want to say it's not all about China. But I do think that China's going, that the rhetoric, the situations with China are probably going to ramp up. I always, whenever I do a chart, I always look at the degree following a planet or a point, and the degree following Donald Trump's moon is the immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country, which is incredibly interesting, really. You know, when you think about how he's spoken about the Mexicans and about immigrants and Syrian migrants and refugees, and the fact that he's married to an immigrant is all, you know, it's fascinating to think about those things. The immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country. So, I mean, even looking at the fact that that is the degree after Trump's moon. By the way, you know, you can look at it this way, that just, you know, an hour and a half or 2 hours after Trump was born, Donald Trump was born, the moon moved on to the immigrant's degree. It's fascinating to think about the movement of the planets when a baby has just been born as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of people in the United States that are very worried about their future. They're worried, you know, that they might get kicked out. You know, he has said that he wants the Muslims to leave. Of course, I don't think it's quite that big a sweeping statement, but it certainly sounded like one. And there's a lot of people who are undocumented people that have come into the States that must be very, very nervous about their future. There's been talk of millions of people being deported. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Saturn goes over his moon and then it opposes his sun. Now, of course, what can happen with Saturn going over somebody's, you know, conjuncting someone's moon and opposing their sun is that they could take on a very important role in life and have a really elevated position. Saturn does not always take away, but Saturn is known as the, you know, a planet of karma, and you know, Saturn really wants its pound of flesh, and Donald Trump is going to have to really toe the line, you know, as president-elect, which we haven't seen a lot of so far with the tweets that come out in the middle of the night and the things that he says and the breaking of protocol with his family in particular. It's very interesting. I just want to say a few more things about Donald Trump's chart, then I'll look at the inauguration chart. But it is so interesting to look at his sun degree as well. He was born right on a full moon, and it was a lunar eclipse. And the degree of his sun is the 3 fledglings in a nest high up in a tree, and that's Gemini 23. And it's interesting to note that this can be very much about him with his children, him with his wife, him with his children. It's like they're in the nest, and part of that nest is going to move to the White House, but part of the nest stays in that tower high up in the tree, if you get my point about how that can really look like Trump Tower. All the, you know, apartment buildings that Trump has built around the world and hotels really fit into that description of Gemini 23, the 3 fledglings in a nest high up in a tree. So, you know, when you get the package with Donald, it looks like, you know, you get the package of his children coming along to White House briefings and to live in the White House, indeed. A very interesting story in amongst all of that. Donald Trump's sun is conjunct the North Node. The North Node in his chart is on a tumultuous labour demonstration. And this can be, oh, hell no, I'm not doing it that way. I have to do it my own way. And of course, it can also point to people who have worked for him that haven't been paid or paid poorly or, you know, didn't have the right working conditions or whatever. But, you know, that North Node is sandwiched in between Uranus and the Sun in Trump's chart. Uranus is on the 18th degree of Gemini. His moon's on the 21st degree of Gemini, and his sun is on the 23rd degree of Gemini. So that's a very close pair, you know, that's very close. And that really talks about somebody who is quite rebellious and has a mind of his own and cannot really be told anything. And of course, when he is told something that he doesn't like, he can be very petulant. It's, you know, it's the spinning of the pacifier can be quite strong with someone who's got what he's got going on in his chart. It's really interesting to note that Uranus in Trump's chart is also another Chinese degree. There's only a few of them in the Sabian symbols, but he happens to have 2 of them. And this one is 2 Chinese men speaking Chinese in a Western crowd. And this can be the dislike of foreign languages, the dislike of those who are foreign. It can, of course, be also the need to find people who share the same language. If you're an astrologer, this degree can really talk about finding other astrologers who share the same language. Does not have to be Chinese. But the thing is, in his chart, it's very interesting. He's got 2 very prominent Chinese degrees. And I think, with the, Saturn going over the Chinese laundry degree in Sagittarius, that there might be a lot more talk and reaction from the Chinese about what's going on. I think it's all rather ripe anyway. So, that's a little bit about those aspects of his chart. What else is there to say about him? There's a lot more to say about him. Yeah, his Saturn's on an interesting degree. His Saturn is on the relationship triangle degree. His Saturn in his chart is on the 24th degree of Cancer, and it's a woman and 2 men, or a man and 2 women, cast away on a small island in the South Seas. And what this talks about is relationship triangles. And it can, which of course he has been known to have affairs, we know that, or at least one that I know of him. I don't really follow his private life in that measure, but it certainly can be about affairs. But it can be, like where he seems to have this very enmeshed relationship with Ivanka, his daughter, Well, his daughter's moving into the White House with him, but his wife is staying, in Trump Tower. So, and that's not to impugn that there's anything strange or sexual going on with his daughter, but a lot of people do say that. I don't want to go into those waters. I have no idea. But it is a very interesting degree that he's got there. It's also, the woman and the 2 men cast away on an island of the South Seas can be very much where there's a lot of people giving him their advice or their ideas. And because it's his Saturn, there can be the idea of really wanting to exclude others and just include certain people. It really can be about that. So, his Venus is conjunct Saturn, which I think is a very big part of, he really does give all of the signs of having narcissistic personality disorder, and very often that has a lot to do with a mother complex, something to do with the mother. The father can be very stern or missing, especially as he has Uranus, the North Node, and the Sun all conjunct, and he is born on a full moon as well. This can have strains in the relationship between the parents, even if it's not apparent on the outside. The child can certainly feel these strains between the male and the female archetypes, especially born on an eclipse, especially with Uranus involved in that opposition. So with his Saturn and his Venus conjunct in Cancer, this can be a very typical mother complex thing that tends to come along with NPD, the narcissistic personality disorder, that Trump shows every single aspect of this personality disorder. And without wanting to get too inflamed in the story, for my own personal opinion, I feel that he's completely unsuited to be president of the United States because he doesn't handle things in a mature manner. And that's, the biggest job in the world. One needs to be able to do that. So it's probably aligned with being the Queen of England, being the biggest job in the world. So his Saturn-Venus conjunction really does show this lack of feeling for others. He has a great deal of difficulty to showing empathy, true empathy, and that's very common with people with NPD. His Venus is on an interesting degree. The Sabian symbol for his Venus is guests are reading in the library of a luxurious home. That's Cancer 26, so which means 25 plus in the zodiac. Guests are reading in the library of a luxurious home. It's very interesting. The degree following his Venus is the furious storm. Some people have written it as the violent storm. This Sabian symbol can be seen as being the violent storm or the furious storm in a canyon filled with valuable homes. The way I put this is that everybody's home is valuable. It doesn't matter whether it's a mansion or if somebody lives, under cardboard under a bridge. Everybody's home is valuable. So it's an interesting one. The furious storm in a canyon filled with valuable homes can certainly be someone who yells and screams or gets really upset or can bring about, sudden eruptions, you know, that it can be really a strong degree. It doesn't have to be, of course. This could be the chart of a counsellor that I'm looking at. You know, there's no way of really telling somebody's real consciousness just by looking at the chart, because the chart is a moment of time. And so the chart is not so much destiny as your character is destiny, and your consciousness, of course, is destiny as well. But when we get someone like Donald Trump, who we've been able to observe for many, many years and has been in the public eye and is 70 years old now, we put that with his chart, we can see certain things and we can draw certain conclusions. So I wouldn't want everybody to think that because they have the furious storm in a canyon filled with valuable homes that, you know, that would be damning them to some certain outcome. Certainly not. You know, some people have these degrees, of course, and they manifest them in the best possible way. I don't see Donald Trump in that. He's, you know, there's definitely a real worry around the way he comports himself as president-elect. And during the election, you know, really serious things to be concerned about. It's interesting to note that sandwiched in between his Saturn and his Venus is the leader of men wrapped in an invisible cloak of power. That's Cancer 25. And this can be the pushy person, the know-it-all, the one who uses their power for not so good reasons. Again, of course, this degree can be a fabulous degree of someone who's very powerful and uses all their power for the right reasons. So, you know, but it's sandwiched in between his Saturn and his Venus. So, you know, this is really, can be a real thing with him. It's like the use and abuse of power, and throwing one's power around can be a big deal. Now, where this gets even more interesting, I think, is that as with this year, he is once again going to be having Uranus squaring his Saturn. And he was having that during the election, before the election, during the campaigning. He was having Uranus squaring his Saturn. The Uranus was, where was it? It was in the 9th house, just got into the 9th house, transiting Uranus, had just gone into his 9th house and was squaring his 11th house Saturn. He's going to be having that again, but it's going to feel very different after the inauguration. What I have predicted all along is that I'm not entirely sure that Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated. I've said this many times. I said that I felt that he would be elected, but not become president. There's no way of really knowing. If we really knew the answer to these questions, then we'd have the keys to the kingdom, which we surely don't. But we do have, you know, very big clues to what's going on. And I would be very surprised if he makes it through the inauguration. Some people have asked me if I'm suggesting he'll be assassinated. I'm not suggesting that at all. Neither do I see it, neither would I say it, because I think that's irresponsible. As far as like him actually being inaugurated, I just have not been able to see that. And curiously, I could not see Hillary Clinton doing that either. Even if Donald Trump was out of the race, I couldn't see Hillary Clinton being inaugurated, nor for that matter, Mike Pence. So, of course, I could be wrong about this, of course, you know. But it's just going to be very interesting to see. You know, as a concerned citizen of the world, I really hope that he doesn't get inaugurated. But anyway, time will tell. And, you know, I hope it's all going to be very good. Of course, also, during this time, it's really, really interesting what's happening in Trump's chart is he's got transiting Saturn any minute now in December. He's going to be having transiting Saturn conjuncting his moon. And in his progressed chart, his progressed moon is conjuncting his natal Saturn. So that's 2 lots of that going on, you know, and there's going to be people that are going to be really asking about his business interests even more, and so they should. I'm not quite sure how he can become president with all those business interests and all of that, millions of dollars for having coffee with Donald Trump or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like that's a good thing. Or that it's even constitutional, of course, even bigger than that. So he's going to be having, you know, quite a few pull-ups with reality, I think, and it's going to be a very interesting thing to observe. We're in very interesting times. There's a lot more that can be said about this, and I might find the time and the energy to do it over the coming weeks. And, you know, of course, as things start to really come about, it's going to become more and more interesting, or more and more revealing, I think. It's, looking at when Donald Trump accepted the nomination on July 21st, 2016 at 10:19 p.m. in Cleveland, Ohio, the sun was on, and it had been for about how long? 16 hours or something like that. The sun had been on the last degree of Cancer. And that Sabian symbol is the daughter of the American Revolution. So when Trump accepted the nomination, the sun was on the daughter of the American Revolution. And, we hear a lot about, this wanting to, making us America great again and taking America back and all these sort of things, this rhetoric, which is really strong. But of course, the daughters of the American Revolution, they can be quite staid, and they actually can be, they're remnants of the past, they can be a bit stodgy or staid. Of course, they have some fabulous history and all that, but looking at it as a symbol, it's an interesting thing because it does not always talk about a revolution that one wants to see come about, It can be the charge for a revolution that ends up actually employing and using exactly the same people again, even if they're not exactly the same people. They're people from the establishment. And I do understand that those that he's put in his, the panel of people that he's chosen, people say they're not establishment. Well, of course they are, and they're all billionaires. So it's a very interesting thing to be watching this as it goes along. You can even, of course, progress the chart for Donald Trump accepts the nomination. And, just hours after he accepted the nomination, the sun moved on to, and of course in the progress chart, it's just 3 months after, a man under emotional stress and blood rushes to his head is the degree of the next degree on, Leo 1. A man under emotional stress, blood rushes to his head. So that's part of the story that's going on here as well. Such an interesting time. It's going to be very interesting to watch this unfold. So I've got the other chart here of the inauguration. And so the inauguration is a very interesting chart. Every year it's held on every 4 years. It's held on the same day, January 20, and at 12 p.m. is when it starts. By the time that the incoming president is sworn in, it's usually about 3 minutes past 12. Just looking at 12 o'clock as the beginning of the ceremony, it's very interesting to notice that right on the top of the chart, on the MC of the chart, the 10th house cusp is the mountain pilgrimage. And I've always seen this degree as really speaking about the President of the United States, or, the Prime Minister of Australia, or the Queen of England. The mountain pilgrimage is such an archetypal Capricorn degree, and there it is right at the top of the chart on the MC. Every time there's an inauguration in the United States, well, certainly if it's on the 20th of January, which they always are, we have this degree right there at the top of the chart. It talks about mountain climbing. It's the mountain goats. It's the ones who have made it to the top of the heap. And by the time that Donald Trump is sworn in, the degree that's on there is, just a few minutes later, the degree that's on there is the large aviary. And the large aviary is an interesting degree as well. That's Capricorn 28. A lot of interference there. That's Capricorn 28. And the large aviary is the media. It's people talking, it's twittering, it's Facebook and all this reporting that goes on as well, the large aviary. And so it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one to watch. The sun is always in the 10th house for the inauguration chart. It's just the way it works. And the sun each year, sometimes it moves off this degree because of leap years, but in this coming year it's on the first degree of Aquarius, and that degree is the old Adobe mission in California. So it's interesting how influential California can be in American politics, but I don't think it's only just about that. The old Adobe mission in California is something like, well, it's a bit different, but it's a similar thing to the White House. It's a large building that is built to, to allow people to feel safe and secure, in a manner of speaking, for people to be able to worship or come together. The idea of being fed, looked after, for the spiritual life of the nation. The large Adobe mission in California speaks about that. The degree following that, and it's only just hours after the inauguration, is very interesting. This happens all the time, so this might not have such a huge influence on this one, but I'm wondering what it's going to be. That is Aquarius 2. It's the degree following the sun, and it comes onto this degree just a few hours after the inauguration. How long after? About 6 hours after the inauguration, it goes onto this degree. It's the unexpected thunderstorm. So there might be an unexpected thunderstorm in one way or another. It's going to be, again, interesting to see what happens with that. So that's, every year you have those types of things. But in this particular year, 2017, we've got a very interesting configuration that really took my eye when I first looked at this chart some time ago. And that is that Mars is going to be on the purging of the priesthood. Mars is going to be on the 25th degree of Pisces, and this is my very this is my very abridged interpretation of this degree. My very shortened interpretations are in the Solar Fire software, and you can click on the degree and have these interpretations come up. I'll just read straight out of that to see, to give you an idea of what this degree can be about: the purging of the priesthood. This symbol shows the ability or the need to be able to see through those that hold important positions yet abuse trust, or those who make great claims but don't live up to them. At regular times in your life, you're likely to find yourself leaving others behind, kicking them out, or experiencing falls from grace. Periodically, there is a need to examine moral and spiritual sincerity. It is easy to allow those who don't really belong to stay because of familiarity or habit. We can lose sight of the ideal through our rationalizing intellect, our ego, or emotive passion. There is a need to cleanse and purify our lives, leading to better spiritual values when this degree is around. What side of the purging are you on? Are you the one with the right motives? Who's in charge? It can talk about things holding you back. It can talk about revealing the truth, throwing out those who don't measure up, dismissals and redundancies, being a hotshot or not, betrayal of trust and cover-ups. And the caution for this is battles over spiritual direction, abusing authority, whistleblowing, damning others, deceiving, lying or misleading, corruption and scandals, and the burning of books. So I didn't edit any of that. That's basically, what I have to say about that degree in my abridged version of that degree. So Mars in the chart of the inauguration chart, Mars is on the 25th degree of Pisces. It's a very interesting degree. That the next day, or not even by the end of that day, Mars will have moved on to the new moon reveals it's time for people to go ahead with their different projects, and this can be a degree of splitting off. But of course, we know that can happen anyway. I mean, if you're going to be inaugurated as President of the United States, after all those ceremonies, it's time now to get on with your different projects. That, of course, can be it. But, when the purging of the priesthood has got Mars on it, it can be where those that don't live up to the ideals, those that don't measure up, really are asked to leave the arena. So it can be about that. And I'm not suggesting it has to happen on the day of the inauguration. It can happen later, These things can really show what's brewing and what's going to come up, not so much always about what's happening exactly on that day. But there certainly will be a lot of people going, Donald Trump is president. That's to be expected. Why Mars stood out so much for me, apart from the fact it's on the purging of the priesthood, which is an enormous degree, is the fact that, by the way, Chiron was on the purging of the priesthood when Donald Trump was nominated to run for the Republican Party. So Chiron's already been right up to the purging of the priesthood degree, and it's been an interesting year of watching, the priesthood, Bernie Sanders being ousted, and then, Hillary Clinton losing the election, even if she got, almost 3 million more votes. Very interesting times. Anyway, the Mars in the inauguration chart is almost exactly square Saturn in Sagittarius. And Saturn's on a degree that I think is really talking about what a lot of people are experiencing already. We haven't, Saturn hasn't come up to this degree yet, but we certainly are experiencing it. I want to say that also I should point out that the chart of the inauguration's got a life of its own already. You know, we don't really have to wait till the inauguration happens. And also the events shown in the inauguration, I've already said this, but in the inauguration chart can really come to light, you know, months after. You know, they can really show themselves because it's a huge event and not everything is contained in that one day. Okay, so Saturn is on an interesting degree, which I think is really talking about how so many people are feeling freaked out and upset. A lot of people are upset, and a lot more upset than they normally might be when their candidate has not won an election. What I'm saying here is that Saturn is on, for the inauguration, it's on the 24th degree of Sagittarius. It's a bluebird, a sign of good luck and happiness, is standing at the door of the house. And with Saturn on the bluebird, a sign of good luck and happiness standing at the door of the house, can be where we go not feeling happy, not feeling like things are going to go well, feeling distressed and upset can be part of the story there, really can. I'm not wishing that on people, but I'm hearing it every single day, and it makes perfect sense. It's interesting to see that, you know, when Saturn moves off Sagittarius 24, which it does shortly after the inauguration, it moves on to Sagittarius 25, which is the chubby little rich boy that rides upon his hobby horse. You know, and there might be a need to rein in, you know, like if Donald Trump does get inaugurated and becomes president, he's certainly going to be needed to be reined in, you know, because the chubby little rich boy riding upon his hobby horse is not a good look for the president of the United States. So, you know, that Saturn-Mars square is one that really talks about, you know, a feeling of hopelessness or doom, or, you know, wondering if everything's going to go wrong. It can also talk about, you know, really not wanting to follow the rules or the laws, you know, and all that sort of stuff. It can also talk about walls. There's a big idea about walls in this inauguration as well. The Saturn and Mars is the archetype of a brick wall. You know, and of course there's been talk about the wall with Mexico, which is not talked about nearly as much now that the election is over. But the karmic condition of the Saturn in the inauguration chart is Sagittarius 23, and that's the group of immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country. So this idea of the group of immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering the new country is a major, major issue in this election season, right through the election and now, because it's the degree following Donald Trump's moon. It's also very interesting. It's Ivanka Trump's, I've got her chart here somewhere. I think she's got that in her. Well, we don't have the time of her birth, but yes, the degree, and we know this is true. The degree of Ivanka Trump's Neptune is the group of immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country. So it's interesting how, you know, Saturn is going to be, you know, smack on her Venus and Neptune conjunction, because her Venus is on the bluebird, the sign of good luck and happiness at the gate of the cottage. So what I'm saying here is that Saturn is going to be all over Ivanka Trump's Venus and Neptune conjunction. And part of that is the group of immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country. Of course, her mother is her mother is an immigrant as well. Yes, so very interesting to look at all these things. So that's a little bit about all of that. So where to next? The inauguration, that's right. At the time of the inauguration, it's again going to be really interesting, because it's another thing about borders and security. And of course, there's always going to be security at an inauguration. But, you know, this inauguration chart talks about much more than, you know, the security at the inauguration. The Pluto in the chart is in the 9th house, and you know, the Pluto transiting the 9th house of the inauguration chart can really talk about conflict with foreigners. You know, it can talk about war. It doesn't have to, but it certainly can, especially as Pluto is on a warship degree. Pluto is on the 18th degree of Capricorn. It's already been up on this degree, Pluto, and then it went retrograde and went back about 3 or 4 degrees, and now it's, you know, it's gone direct again, and it's back where it was earlier in the year. And I will point out that when Pluto was on this degree earlier in the year, it was when Brexit happened. So a really big social change came about, and although they haven't Brexited yet, it certainly has caused a furore, or you know, in many parts of Europe and of course Great Britain. And it was interesting to note, you know, so many Americans were talking about Brexit who may not normally have been interested in the affairs of Britain. Very interesting. And of course, shortly before that, it was, whether Scotland was going to secede from Great Britain. So anyway, so where Pluto is on this inauguration is on the 18th degree of Capricorn, and it's the Union Jack flies from a new British warship. So, I mean, whoever would be inaugurated, on January 20, Pluto's going to be on that degree. Pluto's going to be on that degree whether there's an inauguration or not. So, but the thing is that, if you're going to be loose with your lips and tweeting about China and not having those the usual borders with the Russians in terms of, the usual conversations and the usual relationships makes it very interesting, because the Union Jack flies from a new British warship is very much about having borders and barriers and, this demarcations between this is yours and this is mine. And of course we see in the South China Sea, there's a lot of saber rattling going on, which of course is my part of the world. I almost drowned in the South China Sea. Anyway, that's another story. The Union Jack flies from a new British warship is not only talking about the Union Jack, it's talking about, it's talking about the Star-Spangled Banner. It's talking about the whole thing. It's talking about flags on warships and where they are and what the boundaries are. Such an interesting one. And it's also, when Pluto moves on, which it will soon after the inauguration again, it moves on to a child of about 5 carrying a heavy load of groceries. So that's going to be interesting to observe too. Pluto didn't get up to that in its last sojourn before it went retrograde. So we're going to be seeing that. And of course, the 5-year-old child carrying the heavy load of groceries can be where someone's taken on a job that's way beyond their capability, and, they have trouble carrying that load. It can be, and of course it could talk about Trump's children taking on a bigger role than perhaps they were, well, they weren't elected to take on that role. It's a very interesting one. Mercury on the day of the inauguration has, certainly had raised my eyebrows. Mercury's on the 7th degree of Capricorn. And as I'm making this video, very soon, the sun is going to pass over that degree. At least I think so. Have I looked at that properly? Yes. Straight after I make this, in fact, the sun is going to go over this degree. But Mercury is going to be on this degree at the inauguration. And it's the veiled prophet speaks, seized by the power of a god. It's the 7th degree of Capricorn. The veiled prophet speaks, seized by the power of a god. It's the moon, and Jupiter was only 2 degrees away from it in Hitler's chart. It's like where someone can get up on the and Rajneesh Osho, he had that as his Jupiter degree. It's been very interesting for me to check out who has that degree. There's a lot of people that have a lot of influence who have this degree, and Donald Trump doesn't have it natally, although it is in a fairly loose opposition to his natal Mercury. His natal Mercury is just a few degrees past the opposition to this degree. Anyway, so the veiled prophet speaks, seized by the power of a god. This can speak about Donald Trump's words or whoever's inaugurated, but it can also have this enormous mesmerizing effect on the populace, and it can also talk about the media and the control of the media and who is in control of the media. But I think it's got a lot to do with, the words, the things that Donald Trump says. He has this enormous ability to really influence people with his words. And I mean, of course, to become president of the United States, you need to be able to do that. But this is a bit hypnotic. And it's a bit unusually strong. And so I'm just going to read out, my interpretation of this degree, Capricorn 7. Oh, by the way, this can be in the chart of someone who's really eloquent and has many answers and can really, be helpful and insightful. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the degree. It's just that if it's used in a negative fashion or if it's used for manipulation, it can be very manipulative. So this is Capricorn 7. This is where Mercury is at the time of the inauguration. This degree implies the ability or the need to disseminate information or knowledge. It is coming through the veil. This is interesting because I felt like burping right there, excuse me. It's almost like something's coming up, it's like, and that's what this degree can really feel like. It is coming through the veiled prophet. There are messages, and it seems that they are coming from a deep source or from a place of authority, still it can be difficult to know whether it's always the truth that is being spoken or that's coming through. Look carefully for the signs. Is it truth that you are being fed? With such power in one's words, we have to be careful about what we say as well as what we hear. This energy can be used for the good of all involved, or it can just lead people astray. Something to watch out for is blind acceptance of things you see or hear. This is a very powerful degree, it certainly is. And my keywords are hypnotherapy or hypnotic suggestion, channeling and mediumship, having insights that transport to a higher level, empowerment, translations, prophets, messages, and veils, because it's the veiled prophet, you see. The cautions can be conscious manipulation, propaganda, mind control, not owning up to all the elements of one's personality, barging into other people's space or conversations. So it can be where things just go, things just come out. It's a very interesting one. So Mercury's a little bit, I find that to be a little bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a problem. And that Mercury is still clearing the shadow, the Mercury retrograde shadow. So that's interesting too, to observe. We're in a Mercury retrograde period now, and it went retrograde on the 19th of December, Mercury, when the Electoral Commission voted. It was right on the day that Mercury went retrograde. So that's an interesting thing to observe as well. On the day of the inauguration, the moon's going to be in Scorpio, so there can be a lot of intense emotions. I think the moon in Scorpio is fabulous myself. I'm a very strongly Scorpionic woman. But when the moon's in Scorpio, there can be a lot of, there can be a bit of poisonous, treasonous sort of activity. There can be deep emotions that, it's not, it can be anything but lighthearted. It can be intense, passionate, meaningful, wonderful or terrible, all of those things. So at the inauguration, it's on a very interesting degree. It's the fellowship supper that reunites old comrades, and that's Scorpio 10. One of the themes that comes up for me when I think about this degree, and by the way, I do really like this degree, the fellowship supper, but one of the things that comes up for me sometimes, I really align it with, not every time, but often, with the Last Supper. It can bring about a Judas thing, someone betraying, and for the pieces of silver going against the guards, going against the old guard, being the rat, can be, or having that come up, But another thing that happens with the fellowship supper that reunites old comrades, of course, there's going to be a lot of people. It's interesting that it's old comrades when there might be a few Russians at the inauguration. I don't know. I don't know what the protocol is there, but it's very interesting. And the fellowship supper, it can be where people come together and they drink and they break bread and, they have dinner and they chat, and there can be reunions. It's a beautiful degree. And it can be interesting that it can be this very strong feeling of past life karma being worked out with this degree as well. Just about an hour and a half after the inauguration, the moon moves on to Scorpio 11, which is the drowning man is being rescued. And about 2.5 hours after that, it moves on to the embassy ball degree. So that's going to be interesting to notice, like that, that afternoon and into the evening, it's going to be the embassy ball degree. And of course, there's going to be an embassy ball. Of course, there will be, dinner and dancing, I imagine, and speeches and important people from, ambassadors and dignitaries from all over the world speaking all different languages, of course, will be there. So it's interesting to notice that. But of course, in this chart, it's the moon in Scorpio. So, but the moon is, in a nice aspect with Neptune, but because there's a trine between the moon in Scorpio and Neptune in Pisces. The only thing is that this can lead to a certain degree of not really seeing what's going on. But it can be nice. It can bring about, our wishes, our hopes. It can be where there's a lot of glamour. I really do think the glamour might be really quite strong in all of this as well. The Sabian symbol for Neptune is people traveling a narrow path seeking illumination. It's the 11th degree of Pisces, and it can be where we're heading towards, something, and we're really heading towards the light, and we're staying on path, and that's the path that we take up, and we're heading towards that illumination. And of course, that's what we want. It's Pisces 11. That's been around quite a lot in this election cycle, this degree. Well, you know, where we've had to get on with our own paths and make sure that we're travelling the path we want to be travelling, regardless of politics or what's going on. It's interesting to note that Venus is in Pisces for the inauguration, and the Sabian symbol for Venus is the 18th degree of Pisces, and it's in a huge tent. A famous revivalist conducts his meeting with a spectacular performance. This is where the evangelist takes the stage, and there's a big tent, and there's a lot of people there, or not. Sometimes, of course, he's on the stage and there's no one there. Of course, in the symbol, you know, we can have the exact opposite of what it's saying, but it will be along that general thread. So, in the huge tent, a famous revivalist conducts his meeting with spectacular performance. I mean, that is so Donald Trump. You know, it's the master of ceremonies. It's you know, Barnum and Bailey, you know, in the circus tent. It's Steve Martin in that movie about the evangelist. I do know it, but it's escaped me at the moment. But I often think of that movie, him in that large tent, Steve Martin. He was fabulous in that movie. We can't always trust what's being said by the famous revivalist, of course, you know, but of course they might have a message of redemption, of faith, of things being okay. It's interesting, of course, that Venus is going to be going over the degrees that Chiron's been transiting over. So interesting to notice also, I think there might be 4 Sabian symbols that mention that Chinese you know, Chiron has been sitting for months on one of those degrees, and it's very interesting because Chiron is now square Saturn exactly at the moment, and it's been on this degree for, you know, months and months. It went direct on this, and it's the little white lamb, a child and a Chinese servant. So that's an interesting one. Again, there's so much emphasis on the Chinese in what's going on in these. And of course, it doesn't have to talk about the Chinese. Again, it can be talking about the Mexicans. It can be talking about the Russians, you know, but it just happens to be that there has been a lot of talk about the Chinese. So Chiron on this degree, you know, the little white lamb, a child and a Chinese servant, you know, this can be very much about the haves and the have-nots. You know, we don't have, you know, a servant, Chinese, Mexican, or otherwise, unless we've got some money, or we're living in the right place, or we have the right social standing, or whatever it happens to be, you know. And so I think that, you know, Chiron going direct on Pisces 21, this degree, can have a lot to talk about social stratas, and, you know, whether you're in the lucky few that, you know, the 1%, you know, who have the little white lamb, the child, and the Chinese servant. Where Chiron is at the inauguration is on the 22nd degree of Pisces, and it's the prophet bringing down the new law from the mountain. And this can be very interesting because this can be, and Chiron was on this degree last year as well. It was almost like Moses, you know, bringing down the 10 commandments. You know, this can be like the institution of new laws, and it can be where we go, okay, I'm instigating this law, or I'm bringing in this law, or I'm going to change this law. You thought this was law, now this is law. You know, so that can be, you know, this can be really worrying in amongst it all. Chiron is also going to go over the purging of the priesthood before too long as well, after the inauguration. As I'm doing this recording, Uranus and Jupiter are opposing each other. So it can be where we go, wow, is this really the future? Is this what's really happening? You know, some of us want to run away. Some of us want to move to another country. I've heard that a lot, of course. And but, you know, some of us are going, no, it's going to be all right. We're going to employ faith. It's going to be okay, that no matter what happens, we are going to be okay. And, of course, that's what we need to do. Regardless of any of this, you know, we need to, you know, feel that we are going to be okay. It's interesting to notice where Uranus is going direct, like this week Uranus goes direct after being retrograde for months and months since the middle of this year, and it's going direct on the Boxer is entering the ring. It's Aries 21. The Boxer is entering the ring. It's stepping up to the plate, and that is where Uranus is going to be on the inauguration. The Boxer is entering the ring. And so this can be, you know, the one who wants to take on the fight. And, of course, we've seen that anyway in the election season, you know, the Boxer entering the ring. the pugilist, the one who, puts up his dukes and says, no, come on, we're going to do this. And another way of looking at this degree, of course, is, where we go, okay, I'm going to do this thing I've been wanting to do, for a long time. I feel like I've trained really well. I'm ready for it. I'm, set up. I'm secure in that measure, and I'm going to really take on this thing that I want to do. Naturally, that's how it can come about for many of us. But in terms of the inauguration, it's very interesting with the boxer entering the ring. It can be where there's fights are picked, and any of those sort of things, of course, can happen. Jupiter at the time of the inauguration is going to be on the 23rd degree of Libra, and this is the Chanticleer's voice that heralds the rising sun with enthusiastic tones. Libra 23 is like it's the rooster in the morning that makes a lot of noise and crows and thinks that, sometimes the rooster thinks that he's the one that causes daybreak. He's the one that causes the sun to come up in the morning. So, and this can be a fabulous degree. This can be the voice that we need to hear, the one that wakes us up, who wakes us from our slumber, the one who's got the message can be the idea of this degree. But, it can also be the one who never shuts up or has too much to say or has an overblown sense of his entitlement. Of course, Jupiter on this degree is squaring Donald Trump's Venus. So this symbol shows enthusiasm, joy, confidence, and the desire to greet each day with the anticipation of new opportunities. It is true that each day begins the same. The sun comes up, the world is still spinning, but what the day will bring holds a bit of a mystery. This is a joyous symbol of greeting and heralding the day, but there can be a blurring of the concept of whether the Chanticleer, which is the rooster, causes or simply heralds the new day. You may feel like you're blessed with the voice to be able to speak new developments, to make announcements and wake everybody up to the realities of life. As long as you don't make too much of a noise while doing it, you'll rouse people around you to action. And it can talk about waking early. It's interesting because Donald Trump's up in the middle of the night, with his tweets, and here's the Chanticleer's voice. Yeah, all of that. Waking early, having a clear, beautiful or loud voice, feeling like a brand new start is on its way, speaking up when needed, being a morning person, seeing things ahead of time. And it can be, the caution can be, overstating one's role, talents or abilities, being noisy and disturbing others, sounding off, being loud and irritating, and taking the glory and none of the responsibility. That can be part of it too. The rooster, he just struts around and does his stuff, and he doesn't really have to do a lot of cleaning up or taking a lot of responsibility. So it's an interesting one. Donald Trump's Jupiter is on the 18th degree of Libra. This is in his natal chart, his whole life, obviously. And the Sabian symbol for that is two men placed under arrest are brought before the tribunal of society to give an accounting for their actions. And of course, it can be two men or one man or three men or, two women and a man. It doesn't matter, but it's a symbol. Anyway, so the two men are brought before the tribunal of society to give an accounting for their actions. And at the time of the inauguration, and certainly earlier this year as well, Pluto is squaring his Jupiter. And I think this has got a lot to do with the boundaries between, his business interests. And for my own take on this, of course I can be wrong, naturally, is that I feel that it's not so much the emails, the Russian email story. I reckon it's the story of Trump's business interests in Russia and his relationship with the Russians. I think that is the concern, because I think that the idea of hacking or getting into the emails might be a bit of it might not be, so much the truth as definitely, I feel that his big business interests all over the world, not just in Russia, but I think that, his business interests are really something that need to be looked at more. Well, obviously, I don't know, but it's, it's constitutionally, it's said to be not allowed to have that much business interest. It's a conflict of interest. And so Donald Trump is currently having Pluto squaring his Jupiter. This and the Pluto is on the Union Jack flying from a new British warship. It is squaring his Jupiter in Libra on the two men placed under arrest or brought before the tribunal of society to give an accounting for their actions. And anybody having a Jupiter-Pluto square is likely to have big conflicts of law, what their interests are. They're likely to be argumentative, bolshy, you know, really wanting to push through with their objectives and not listening that well. Can be part of the big agenda with all of that as well. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. So something else that's happening on the day of the inauguration is that the moon's north node is on the 4th degree of Virgo. It's the black and white children are playing happily together. There's no indication of whether the black and white children are playing happily. This is just part of the symbol. It can be, you know, the issue is, are people from different races, different religious backgrounds, different nationalities, are they all getting along? Are they playing happily or not? You know, it can be a really big deal about that. Interestingly, you know, and one hopes that we all will be playing happily together, because that is what we want, of course, from this, you know, this outcome, and also, you know, from the North Node. That's, of course, what we want. The South Node is on the 4th degree of Pisces, and it's very interesting. It's the heavy traffic linking two seaside resorts. That's the South Node. It's the 4th degree of Pisces. And I have a feeling that Donald Trump is going to be getting on a lot of planes. He's going to be traveling to a lot of places, and I think that the boundaries around his business interests are going to be very interesting to watch. I feel like he's going to be traveling a lot. It could also be, of course, you know, the motorcade between Washington and New York, which obviously is going to be more than might have been expected, you know, because he's not giving up, you know, he's not moving wholly to the White House, apparently, by the sound of it. So, you know, the heavy traffic on the narrow isthmus linking two seaside resorts, of course, it doesn't have to do with seaside resorts. It has to do with two destinations. And so, you know, the driving backwards and forwards. But I think it's also the driving backwards and the flying backwards and forwards. I think that's going to be happening too. But it can also be, you know, being in touch with, you know, rulers and people all over the world can be part of that, which you would expect anyway. This the sun in the chart of the inauguration is completely unaspected, which I don't think is that entirely healthy. It does give me a feeling of something weird is going to happen. It feels to me. It's not that cut and dried. This whole, you know, idea of this inauguration is not that cut and dried. It's not that clear. So it's going to be, again, I'm saying it again, interesting going into this period. Saturn, I think, is going to be showing us many things. And, of course, Saturn right now is on the child and the dog with borrowed eyeglasses. If you're old enough to remember Sherman and Mr. Peabody, the cartoon, I often think about those, you know, the dog and you know, the dog with the glasses. Anyway, so Donald Trump's South Node is the child and the dog wearing borrowed eyeglasses, and that's where Saturn has been. Well, it is right now. And let's come back to the chart for right now. Yes, it's on it right now. The child and the dog wearing borrowed eyeglasses. I'm going to read out the whole thing with this one. This is from my book. It's perhaps I've written more than this, but this is the oracle part of it. Perhaps someone is pretending to be more in control or smarter than they are. Or is this a situation of innocent play? Whatever the situation, this can work to make a consciousness shift. By changing both your appearance and your perceptions, you can create some new understanding of your dreams or understanding of how life can be, and it can help you to grow into it. People in this situation may have no idea where they are headed in life or what they are doing with it now, but with some play, some fun and light relief, and some light relief can be had from the process. So what I'm saying here is, I'm sorry, I won't read that out because I'm doing a Saturn thing where I'm not reading it very well. You know, Saturn on the child and the dog with borrowed eyeglasses can be really where we're not able to see what's really going on, because what we're being shown is playtime and pretend, or we've got the spectacles on that aren't our lenses. We can't really see through them properly. And it's interesting that it's Trump's South Node his whole life. And so, that can show, that there's a certain amount of delusion or illusion that comes along with the whole Trump idea. Trump's North Node is on the tumultuous Labour demonstration. I know I said that earlier. And that's Saturn is opposite that. So Saturn's on the child and the dog wearing borrowed eyeglasses on Trump's South Node. The North Node in his chart is the tumultuous Labour demonstration, and it's basically, oh no, I'm not doing that, or I'm not going there, I'm not going to do that, at all. Don't ask me to do it. So it's a very interesting one, and Saturn's going to be showing us many things over the coming months between now, well, it's only 2 months, between now and the inauguration. Saturn's going to go over the Chinese laundry, and it's going to go over the group of immigrants fulfilling the requirements for entering a new country. And then it's going to go over the bluebird, a sign of good luck and happiness, is standing at the door of the cottage, which is where it will be on the inauguration. And then Saturn's going to go on to the chubby little rich boy that rides upon his hobby horse. I think Saturn's got a lot to do with the, what's coming up with all of this, and that's why I've emphasized it so much, particularly as Saturn is all over Trump's chart like a rash in this coming couple of months. But at the same time, he's got Uranus bolstering him from Aries. It's sextiling his North Node. It's trining his South Node. He's been having Uranus sextiling his Uranus. And very soon he's going to have Uranus sextiling his Sun. But I feel that, and Uranus is going to be squaring his Saturn, and then Uranus is going to be squaring his Venus. So I just feel like there's some big shocks in store. There's some big changes. And I don't know. I just really can't see Donald Trump being inaugurated. I could be wrong, as I've said a number of times. It's very hard to tell exactly with astrology where things are going. If we knew exactly, we'd all be, extremely wealthy as astrologers. But we can definitely see what the themes are, and the Sabian symbols tell us even more clearly what the themes are. It's quite extraordinary. There's some things I haven't spoken about. There's so much more to say, but, we lose our attention span. And I've said what I think needs most to be said. The big thing that stood right out for me was that Mars-Saturn square, which has got many people upset and feeling like, like it's almost like hope has eluded them. And people are really nervous and upset. And that Mars-Saturn square is certainly about walls and barriers and differences between people. And of course, what needs to happen, as always, is that we need to dissolve the boundaries between people, not in an unhealthy way, in a healthy way that allows us to have our neighbours, the people that are different from us, the people that are really, they're fabulous people. I mean, it's very unusual for people to be terrorists, really, and rapists. We've been fed these lines that are so scarifying. That's led to us, with our borders, these walls, like between us and others, these walls between us and others who hold different political views. It's been very divide and conquer, and that's got a lot to do with that Pluto on the Union Jack flies from a new British warship. The political maxim of divide and conquer is alive and well with that degree. It's like, the only way you can really win is to, get the populace to divide off against itself, and then you play the populace off against each other, and that's how you win. And so I want to finish this off. If you're a Trump supporter and you've stayed here this long, I want to say that I don't want to cause division between those who, support one person or support another person. That's not my aim. I just wanted to speak about what I'm seeing here, and my thoughts are, with the majority of people that have observed Trump, that he's not well equipped to be president of the United States. If he really was going to bring about a revolution, I don't think he would have stacked his, his people with, with the billionaires. I mean, it's just very weird. Anyway, it's going to be very interesting to observe. I hope for the best, and I hope everything's going to be perfectly okay. I don't know whether perfectly okay. I don't know whether it ever is perfectly okay. But, I hope for calm and peace and the best outcome for all of us. Bye for now.